400 years. That is how long China plunged into darkness after the Battle of Red Cliffs. Han civilization was on the verge of being wiped out, and the north became a hunting ground for nomadic tribes. As the Roman Empire crumbled, the entire globe seemed to be sliding into the dark Middle Ages. But in 581 AD, a bolt of lightning tore through the night sky. A historic anomaly, the Sui Dynasty, was born. Unification. A goal warlords like Cao Cao and Liu Bei spent their whole lives chasing in vain took this dynasty only 9 years. Just 20 years later, its granaries held so much grain that it sustained the subsequent Tang Golden Age for 50 years. This was far more than just overflowing granaries. In record time, the Sui restored a rigorous household registration system, repaired the Great Wall to stabilize the frontiers, and reopened the trade routes to the west that had been cut off for centuries. Foreign merchants from the western regions flocked to the Silk Road once more, and the city of Chang'an was crowded with traders speaking different languages. Its military integrated the elite Guanlong cavalry of the north with the naval forces of the south, crushing all surrounding powers. The mighty Turks and Tuyuhun tribes were forced to submit to the Sui. An empire with such peak military power, wealth, and territory suddenly collapsed at its absolute zenith. It survived for only 37 years, a lifespan shorter than the reign of many individual emperors in history. Why? Because this was not a normal dynasty. This was a super engineering project designed for suicide. It burned its entire lifespan just to pave the road for the next dynasty, the Tang. Welcome back to Civilization Unmasked. Today, we are going to disassemble this insane war machine. First, we need to figure something out. Why did the Han Chinese in the south and the warlords in the north all fail, but the Sui succeeded? The answer lies in its genes, the Guanlong group. Simply put, this was the most powerful hybrid organism on Earth at the time. They possessed the savage physique, military organization, of nomadic tribes, while installing the administrative brain of Han civilization. The most savage blade plus the most civilized pen. This was the core of the Sui. Unlike the southern aristocratic families who lived in luxury and only knew how to engage in empty philosophical debates, the Guanlong group was a military economic community built on the soldier-farmer system. They farmed in peace and fought in war. They knew the cavalry tactics of the nomads and mastered the Han-style defensive warfare tactics. Even more terrifying, their core families had intermarried for generations, forming a tight-knit network with unshakable cohesion. This was an absolute advantage that neither the weak southern Han regimes nor the scattered northern warlords possessed. That's why they were able to crush regional divisions and unite the nation in record time. Emperor Wen of Sui, Yang Jian, was the administrator of the system. But he discovered a fatal bug in the system: the aristocratic families. These clans, who held a monopoly on government positions, were vampires on the empire. The Wang and Ji clans in the south, and the Kui and Lu clans in the north. These old families recognized bloodline, not ability. Official positions were passed down within families for generations, and the imperial court's orders couldn't penetrate their walls. The Guanlong group was a new nobility rising through martial power. The monopoly of the old families not only threatened imperial power, but directly squeezed the interests of the Guanlong group. To kill this virus, Yang Jian released the most important line of code in Chinese history, the Imperial Examination System, Keiju. Everyone, this wasn't just a test. This was a class reshuffle. Yang Jian launched the Imperial Examination to purge the empire's systemic flaws and to consolidate his group's rule. It was an inevitable choice. It told the world, the road to power no longer depends on who your father is, but on your exam paper. Although only a few dozen people were admitted annually during the Sui, once this tear was opened, the privilege of the old aristocracy was doomed to collapse. This was a system-level reformatting that freed up systemic capacity for the golden age that followed. System update complete. Next came the hardware upgrade. History welcomed its maddest engineer, Emperor Yangdi of Sui, Yangguang. He faced a geographical deadlock. China's natural rivers all flow east to west, but the political center was in the north, while the economic center was in the south. The head was separated from the body, and the blood could not flow. So, Yangguang decided to do something only God should do: artificially twist geography. He ordered the excavation of the Grand Canal, a total length of 2,700 kilometers. This is equivalent to building the Panama Canal of the ancient world and connecting it to the Great Wall. And he wasn't blindly commanding from the palace. He personally surveyed the routes and drew the blueprints. His obsession with the engineering reached the extreme. He demanded the canal be wide enough for 4 imperial dragon barges to sail side by side, deep enough to carry 10,000 bushel grain barges, and even unified the construction of post stations and granaries along the banks. The Grand Canal wasn't dug blindly. It was scientifically divided into 4 sections: the Yongji Canal, the Tongji Canal, the Hangu Canal, and the Jiangnan River. This design precisely connected the 4 major water systems of the Yellow River, the Huai River, the Yangtze River, and the Qiantang River. This design minimized construction effort while maximizing logistical value. This planning capability would be considered top tier in any era. Few mention that this paranoid engineer also revised the decode, removing harsh tortures from the previous dynasty, attempting to standardize rule through institutions. Deep in his bones, he held an ideal of a perfect empire. But this ideal was ultimately swallowed by his rush for quick success. From a systems theory perspective, he was performing a vital arterial bypass operation on the empire. He had to forcibly dig a man-made river running north to south, allowing the blood of the south, grain, to be transported to the brain of the north, the capital. This was a violent yet successful surgery. Centuries later, when Marco Polo saw this river, he was stunned. He told the West in his travels, "There is an empire in the East that can connect an entire continent with water. Without this river, there would be no later Tang Dynasty, and arguably, no modern-day Beijing." But what was the cost of the surgery? It was 5 million conscripted laborers. In an age without excavators, it was all done by hand and shoulder. 4 or 5 out of every 10 died. Every cubic meter of river water was mixed with the blood and tears of laborers. The conscripted workers toiled day and night without enough food or rest. When hungry, they ate tree bark. When exhausted, they fell on the construction site and never got up. Overseers whipped them to keep up with the schedule. Many died of exhaustion, disease, or starvation. Because the schedule was so tight, fallen laborers were sometimes buried directly under the canal embankments, becoming part of the canal itself. History records. Bleached bones lined both banks of the canal. This isn't an exaggeration. It was a literal hell on earth. Yangguang overdrew the people's strength, thinking he was accelerating national fusion. but he was actually hammering the nails into his empire's coffin. If building the canal was an overdraft, then the next move was suicide. While the canal project was still draining the empire's resources, Yang Guang ordered a full-scale expedition against Goguryeo. Why did he have to fight? Because Goguryeo at that time wasn't a fringe tribe. It was the only system imitator of the Central Plains in East Asia. It had walls, agriculture, and institutions. In the eyes of the Sui, it was the only potential hegemon that could challenge the order of the Central Plains. Even more concerning to the Sui was that Goguryeo controlled the vital route to Liaodong, cutting off the connection between the Central Plains and the Northeast. It was even secretly allying with the Turks, attempting to pincer the Sui from north and south. To thoroughly eliminate this threat, Yang Guang launched 3 full-scale expeditions, mobilizing the empire's full military and economic might. The first expedition alone used over 1 million soldiers. But because of Goguryeu's feigned surrender and logistical failures, they returned in a disastrous defeat, with half the army dead or wounded. The most fatal blow was the Battle of Salsu. The Goguryeo army feigned retreat, luring the Sui army to cross the river and then attacking them midstream. Tens of thousands of Sui soldiers were buried in the river, and all grain and equipment were captured. Of the 300,000-strong expeditionary force, a mere 2,700 soldiers returned alive. This crushing defeat not only decimated the empire's elite forces, but shattered the people's last bit of trust in the imperial court. But he wouldn't give up. Ignoring the exhaustion of the people and the canal's drain on national strength, he insisted on launching a second and third expedition. Yang Guang committed the engineer's most fatal error. He ignored the fatigue limit of his materials. Infrastructure, the canal, plus war, Goguryeo, was equivalent to injecting nitroglycerin into an overheating engine. The result? The engine exploded. The people rebelled, not because they were hungry, but because they were tired. Every failure added fuel to the empire's collapse. This was a national-level death by overexhaustion. The once mighty empire, having just risen, collapsed completely from overextension. Here comes the most ironic truth. The Sui Dynasty fell, but who was Li Yuan, the one who seized the throne? He was Emperor Yang's first cousin? This wasn't even a change of dynasty. It was more like a hostile takeover within the family. Li Yuan himself was a core member of the Guanlong group, from the same lineage as Yang Jian and Yang Guang. He rose up with the support of the Guanlong group, and when he rebelled, he rallied his forces under the banner of purging corrupt officials to save the dynasty. Essentially, this was a transfer of power within the Guanlong group itself. What's even more ironic, the massive granaries left by the Sui, like the Luoku and Hanjia granaries, became the capital for Li Yuan and his son to recruit troops. The Imperial Examination system created by the Sui became the tool for the Tang to recruit talent and stabilize rule. Even the Tang's official system and laws were slightly modified versions of the Sui's, almost copied entirely. Even Li Shimin's later strategy of managing the Western regions and consolidating the East Asian order was inherited directly from Yang Guang's original intent in attacking Goguryeo. Li Shimin simply slowed down the pace and conveniently harvested the reputation of a wise ruler. Emperor Yangdi of Sui was the man who built a house in a storm and died of exhaustion on the eve of its completion. Li Shimin was the lucky man who walked in the next morning, stepped into the finished mansion, and was praised by future generations. The so-called Golden Age of Tang was actually built upon the massive foundation of the Sui. This is the cruel yet fascinating law of history. Short-lived dynasties are often the rule makers. Long-lived dynasties are often the rule executors. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years, but it unified the writing system, weights and measures, and axle lengths, breaking down regional barriers and paving the road for national unification. The Sui Dynasty lasted only 37 years, but it created the Imperial Examination, breaking down class barriers, and dug the Grand Canal, breaking down north-south barriers. They were like the icebreakers of civilization. They steamed ahead at full speed, using their own hulls to smash through the ice of the old world, opening up shipping lanes, but shattering themselves in the impact. The ships that followed were then able to set sail on the open water and create a golden age. The legacy of the Sui nourished more than just the Tang. The Grand Canal remained the lifeline of north-south transportation in China for over 1,000 years. The Imperial Examination was used for 1,300 years, profoundly influencing the selection of officials in China and East Asia. This millennium-spanning legacy holds far greater significance than the fleeting glories of even the longest-lasting dynasties. The new empire standing on the corpse of the Sui, the Tang, was about to welcome one of the most glorious eras in human history. But it too would eventually face a more deadly virus, a cancer cell breeding from within its prosperity. How did that golden age, that Emperor Xuanzong cherished so deeply, die a sudden death overnight? In the next episode, we will uncover the truth of the Anxi Rebellion. Finally, I want to ask everyone a question. If we ignore morality and look only at the results, do you think Yang Guang was an irredeemable tyrant or an underestimated strategic genius? Drop your thoughts down in the comments section.